Welcome back to Talking Papers Faceless Podcast. I'm Alquasa, and as always, with me is Shaquille. We are your guides to the most fascinating research out there. You can catch us every Monday and Thursday,
Every Monday and Thursday, that's right.
dissecting a new paper and uncovering those hidden gems of knowledge.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure to be here.
Today, we are tackling a topic that, well, it might not sound thrilling at first, supply chains.
Supply chains, yeah.
But stick with us. We're diving deep into a brand new study, Building Resilient Supply Chains, Perspectives on Procurement Risk Management.
Okay.
What's so cool about this one is it's not just theory. They actually interviewed 25 pros across industries, manufacturing, retail, healthcare, you name it.
You name it, that's right.
So we're getting those real-world, battle-tested insights.
And believe me, they had a lot to say about what it really takes to build a supply chain that can weather any storm.
Oh, I bet. Before we get started, though, a quick reminder to our listeners. Hit that subscribe button and leave us a comment if there's a specific aspect of supply chain resilience that you're curious about. Your engagement helps us grow and keeps these deep dives coming. Now, let's get into it. This research doesn't shy away from the reality that companies are facing a whole barrage of risks to their supply chains. It's not just about a supplier messing up an order. We're talking major disruptions, the kind that can bring
The entire industries.
to their knees.
Right, and they break down these risks into three main buckets: supplier risks, supply market risks, and external environmental risks. It's a framework that helps us understand the different layers of vulnerability at play.
Okay, so let's unpack those categories a bit. Supplier risks. Those seem pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, those are the ones that you think of first.
A supplier goes bankrupt, has quality issues, or just can't deliver on time.
Right.
Those kinds of things can have a domino effect on the whole system.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is the researchers found this was the most common concern among the industry folks they interviewed. It makes sense when you think about it. These are the risks companies have the most direct control over. So naturally, they're top of mind.
Right. But then you have the supply market risks, things that are often outside a company's control. We're talking sudden price hikes, shortages of key materials, things that can throw a wrench in even the most well-oiled machine.
Right. And we've seen this play out in recent years. With the semiconductor shortage, for example, geopolitical instability is a huge factor here. It can create shockwaves that ripple through global supply chains.
And then there are those external environmental risks,
Yeah.
pandemics, natural disasters, even big regulatory changes.
Yeah.
Those can be real game changers.
Absolutely. And what I find fascinating is how the researchers emphasize the importance of a thorough risk assessment. They're not talking about just checking boxes. It's about really understanding the vulnerabilities specific to your business and prioritizing them based on their potential impact.
So it's about being proactive and having a plan in place before things hit the fan.
Exactly. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. The research found that supplier relationships are absolutely crucial for building resilience. It's not just about getting the lowest price anymore. It's about forging true partnerships.
So it's about moving beyond that transactional mindset
Yeah,
and building relationships based on trust and collaboration.
precisely. And the study highlights some specific practices that companies are using to cultivate those strong supplier relationships. Regular supplier audits, for example, go beyond just checking financial statements. It's about understanding how your suppliers operate, their quality control processes, even their ethical and environmental standards.
Like due diligence.
Yeah,
But for your suppliers, you're really getting a deep understanding of who you're working with.
exactly. And then there's collaborative risk management. This is about working with your suppliers to identify and mitigate risks together. You're developing joint risk assessments, sharing contingency plans. It's a team effort.
So you're moving from a purely transactional relationship to one that's more strategic and collaborative.
Precisely. And this ties into the idea of long-term partnerships. Building those strong relationships over time can lead to more stability and predictability in the supply chain.
It makes sense. If you have a solid foundation of trust and communication, you're better equipped to handle whatever challenges come your way. But what about that classic advice of diversifying your suppliers?
Right. That's another key practice highlighted in the study. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, as they say. Sourcing from multiple suppliers and geographic locations can reduce your dependence on any single source and spread the risk.
It's like hedging your bets, but in the supply chain game.
Exactly. And this diversification strategy is especially relevant in today's world.
Mm.
With all the geopolitical uncertainty and the lingering effects of the pandemic.
Speaking of today's world, let's talk tech. The research found that companies are increasingly using digital tools to manage supply chain risks. It seems like a no-brainer in the age of data. But is it just about automating tasks, or is there more to it?
It's much more than that. It's about using data to gain insights and make better decisions. We're talking about using technology to make your supply chain smarter and more responsive.
Okay, so give us some examples. What are some of the key technologies highlighted in the study?
Well, predictive analytics is a big one. It's essentially using data to forecast potential disruptions. Think of it like predicting the weather. But for your supply chain.
So you can anticipate problems before they arise and take steps to mitigate them.
Exactly. Then there's blockchain. You might know it from the world of cryptocurrency, but it's finding its way into supply chain management as well.
I've heard a bit about that, but I'm still a bit fuzzy on how it actually works in practice.
It's all about increasing transparency and traceability. Imagine being able to track a product's journey from start to finish, knowing exactly where it came from and who handled it along the way.
So you can verify the authenticity of products and reduce the risk of fraud or counterfeiting.
Precisely. And then there's advanced analytics. This involves using sophisticated data analysis techniques to identify patterns and trends that might signal risk. It's like having a detective for your supply chain, looking for clues that something might be about to go wrong.
That's pretty cool. So you're not just reacting to problems, you're actively looking for them before they even surface.
Exactly. And finally, there's artificial intelligence, or AI. It's still emerging in this space, but it has the potential to automate risk detection and even suggest mitigation strategies.
So it's like having a super smart assistant who's constantly monitoring your supply chain and alerting you to potential problems.
That's the idea. It's about leveraging technology to enhance visibility and make your supply chain more proactive and responsive.
This is all fascinating stuff, and I bet our listeners are eager to hear more about how companies are putting these ideas into practice. But before we get to that, we're going to take a quick break. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave us a comment if there's a specific aspect of supply chain resilience you'd like us to explore further. We'll be right back with more insights from Building Resilient Supply Chains.
Welcome back to Talking Papers Faceless podcast. Before the break, we were exploring the various risks companies face in their supply chains and the innovative ways they're leveraging technology to mitigate those risks.
Right, and I think our listeners are ready to hear about how companies are putting those strategies into action. What does it actually mean to build a resilient supply chain? What are the key takeaways from the research in terms of practical steps companies are taking?
Well, one of the biggest takeaways is that building resilience is about moving beyond simply reacting to problems. It's about being proactive, anticipating potential disruptions, and putting measures in place to minimize their impact before they happen.
So it's about having a plan, but not just any plan. It's about a plan that's built on a deep understanding of your specific vulnerabilities and potential points of failure.
Exactly. And the article outlines several key practices that companies are using to achieve this. One is something they call inventory buffering, which sounds pretty straightforward.
It does. Is it essentially just holding extra inventory of critical materials to act as a cushion in case of disruptions, like having a stockpile of those essential components, just in case?
That's the gist of it. It's like having a safety net for your supply chain. Of course, there are costs associated with holding extra inventory, but the researchers argue that the potential cost savings from avoiding a major disruption can far outweigh those upfront expenses.
That makes sense. So what about flexible sourcing strategies? What do those look like in practice?
Flexible sourcing strategies involve having multiple sourcing options and flexible contracts. This allows companies to quickly adapt to changing conditions. If one supplier runs into trouble, you have backup options ready to go.
So it's not just about having a plan B. It's about having a plan B. That's already in motion. So you can pivot quickly without missing a beat.
Precisely. And then there's the concept of redundancy in the supply chain. This means having backup suppliers and alternative transportation routes.
So even if one part of the supply chain is disrupted, the goods can still flow. It's like having multiple pathways for those essential materials to reach their destination.
Exactly. It's about building in multiple layers of protection so that a single disruption doesn't bring the whole system crashing down.
And finally, there's scenario planning. What does that entail? And how does it contribute to supply chain resilience?
Scenario planning is all about running through different what-if scenarios. You're essentially trying to anticipate potential disruptions and develop response plans in advance. For example, what if a major earthquake disrupts production at one of your key suppliers? What if a new trade war erupts and disrupts global shipping routes?
It's like a mental fire drill for your supply chain, right? You're running through these potential crises and figuring out how you'd respond so that you're not caught flat-footed when something unexpected happens.
Precisely. It's about being proactive and thinking through those potential disruptions so you can be prepared to adapt and respond effectively.
So we've talked a lot about risk and disruption. But what about the other side of the coin? How does building a resilient supply chain create value for businesses?
That's a great question. And it's something the researchers delve into as well. One of the key points they make is that a resilient supply chain is a more reliable supply chain.
Meaning that companies can be more confident that they'll be able to get the products and materials they need when they need them, without any hiccups along the way.
Exactly. And that reliability translates into increased customer satisfaction. If your customers know, they can count on you to deliver on your promises. They're more likely to be loyal and to recommend your products or services to others.
So resilience is not just about avoiding losses and disruptions. It's also about building trust and loyalty with your customers.
Absolutely. And that trust and loyalty can then lead to increased revenue and profitability. In other words, resilience is not just about mitigating risk, it's also about driving growth.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we've established that resilience is good for business, but the research also highlights the importance of sustainability. In building those resilient supply chains, it's not just about weathering the storm, it's about doing it in a way that's responsible and ethical.
Right. And I think this speaks to a growing awareness among businesses that sustainability and resilience are not mutually exclusive concepts. They actually reinforce each other.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How exactly does sustainability factor into the equation of building a resilient supply chain?
Well, sustainable procurement practices, for example, can help mitigate a whole range of risks. For instance, think about the increasing number of regulations governments are implementing related to environmental protection and ethical labor practices.
So companies that aren't sourcing their materials and products sustainably could face fines.
Yeah.
Or even be barred from doing business in certain markets.
Exactly. And then there's the reputational risk. Consumers are increasingly aware of the environmental and social impact of the products they buy. And they're choosing to support companies that align with their values.
So companies that are seen as being unsustainable could face boycotts or lose market share to competitors who are perceived as being more responsible.
That's right. And then there are the supply chain disruptions caused by environmental events, like natural disasters or resource scarcity.
So if a company is sourcing from regions that are vulnerable to climate change or relying on resources that are becoming increasingly scarce, their supply chains are inherently more fragile and susceptible to disruption.
Precisely. So sustainable procurement is not just about doing the right thing, it's also about protecting your business from a whole host of risks and ensuring its long-term viability.
It sounds like sustainable procurement is a complex and evolving field, but one that's becoming increasingly crucial for companies that want to build resilient and responsible supply chains. Are there any specific examples from the research of how companies are putting this into practice?
Absolutely. Many companies are now incorporating environmental, social, and governance, or ESG criteria, into their supplier evaluations.
So it's not just about price and quality anymore, it's about the supplier's overall impact on the environment and society.
Exactly. And some companies are going even further, setting ambitious targets for reducing their own carbon footprint or sourcing a certain percentage of their materials from recycled or renewable sources.
It sounds like a lot of work,
Yeah.
but also incredibly important work. Are there particular challenges companies face in implementing these sustainable procurement practices?
Of course, there are always challenges when implementing new strategies, especially when it comes to something as complex as sustainability. One of the biggest challenges companies face is ensuring transparency throughout the supply chain.
Right, because it's not enough to just know that your company's committed to sustainability. You need to know that your suppliers and their suppliers and so on are all upholding the same standards, right?
Exactly. And that can be a real challenge, especially when dealing with complex global supply chains.
And what about cost? Sustainable materials and products can sometimes be more expensive, right? How do companies balance that with the need to stay competitive?
Cost is definitely a consideration, but the research suggests that the long-term benefits of sustainable procurement far outweigh any short-term cost increases. You're mitigating risks,
Yeah.
building a stronger reputation, and ultimately creating a more sustainable business overall, which can lead to greater efficiency, innovation, and customer loyalty.
It sounds like an investment worth making. Speaking of investments, what about the human factor? What role does leadership play in driving these initiatives and
Yeah.
fostering a culture of resilience and sustainability?
That's a crucial point, and it's something the researchers emphasize as well. Strong leadership is absolutely essential for driving sustainable procurement and building resilient supply chains.
So it's not just about having the right strategies in place. It's about having the right people at the helm, leading by example, and setting the tone for the entire organization.
Exactly. The research found that leaders need to make it clear that sustainability and resilience are top priorities for the organization. It's not just about talking the talk, it's about walking the walk.
So leaders need to be willing to invest the resources, the funding, the staffing, the tools, to make these initiatives a reality and to create a culture of accountability where everyone in the organization feels responsible for upholding those sustainability and resilience standards.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond just providing resources and setting expectations. Leaders need to foster a culture where innovation and collaboration are encouraged.
So it's about empowering employees at all levels to think critically about these issues, to come up with creative solutions, and to work together to build a more resilient and sustainable future for the company.
Precisely. And remember, building a resilient supply chain is not a one-and-done task. It's an ongoing process.
Right. It's not like you can just check a box and say, okay, our supply chain is resilient now, we're good to go. It's about constantly assessing your risks,
Yeah.
adapting your strategies.
And staying ahead of the curve.
Exactly. As the global landscape continues to change, companies need to be constantly evolving and adapting their approaches to supply chain management. And that requires strong leadership to guide the way, to stay informed about emerging trends and technologies, and to foster a culture of continuous learning and improvement. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from risk assessment to supplier relationships to technology to sustainability to leadership. It's clear that building a resilient supply chain is a complex and multifaceted challenge.
It is. But before we conclude this episode, there's one more crucial element I want to touch on: regulatory compliance. We can't talk about supply chain resilience without acknowledging the complex web of regulations companies need to navigate.
Right, we've talked about managing risk, building relationships, leveraging technology, embracing sustainability, and fostering strong leadership. But we haven't yet delved into the world of rules and regulations. What role does regulatory compliance play in building a resilient supply chain?
It's actually a critical piece of the puzzle. Companies need to be aware of and adhere to a wide range of regulations related to their supply chains.
What kind of regulations are we talking about here? Give us some examples.
Well, there are regulations related to international trade, environmental standards, labor practices, product safety, data privacy. The list goes on.
It sounds like a minefield. So not only does a company need to make sure that it's complying with all these regulations, but it also needs to ensure that its suppliers are as well, right?
Precisely. And failing to comply with these regulations can have serious consequences.
Like what? What are the potential repercussions for companies that don't take regulatory compliance seriously?
Well, for one thing, there can be legal and financial penalties. We're talking hefty fines, lawsuits, and even the possibility of criminal charges in some cases.
So the stakes are pretty high. And it's not just about the financial hit. There's also the potential for significant damage to the company's reputation.
Exactly. Consumers are increasingly holding companies accountable for ethical and responsible practices, and news of regulatory violations can spread like wildfire, leading to boycotts, lost sales, and a diminished brand image.
It's like a domino effect. One regulatory misstep can topple a company's carefully constructed reputation. But how do companies ensure regulatory compliance across their often complex and global supply chains? It seems like a daunting task.
It can be. But there are a number of steps companies can take to mitigate that risk. One is to conduct thorough compliance audits of their suppliers.
So it's about going beyond just trusting that your suppliers are doing things by the book.
Yeah.
It's about actively verifying that they're meeting all the necessary requirements and adhering to the relevant regulations.
Exactly. And companies can go a step further by developing robust regulatory compliance frameworks.
So that means putting systems and processes in place to ensure that they're not only complying with current regulations, but also staying ahead of any potential changes. In the regulatory landscape, right, it's about having a proactive approach to compliance.
Right. And this is where technology can play a really important role. There are software platforms designed specifically to help companies track regulations, monitor supplier compliance, and automate various aspects of the compliance process.
So technology can help streamline the compliance process, making it less burdensome and more efficient, while also reducing the risk of human error.
Precisely. And it allows companies to focus more of their energy on the strategic aspects of compliance, such as anticipating future regulatory changes and developing proactive policies to address emerging risks.
It sounds like regulatory compliance is not just about following the rules. It's about being strategic and forward-thinking. It's about integrating compliance into the company's overall strategy for building a resilient and responsible supply chain.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that compliance is not just a cost of doing business. It's an opportunity to build trust with customers, investors, and regulators, and to create a more sustainable and ethical business model.
Welcome back to Talking Papers, Faceless podcast. We've been deep diving into the world of supply chains
Yeah.
and what it takes to build resilience. In today's complex global landscape,
Yes, we have.
we've talked about managing risk, strengthening supplier relationships, harnessing the power of technology, embracing sustainability, and the crucial role of leadership in driving these initiatives.
Right.
And as we discussed, navigating the complex world of regulatory compliance is another key piece of the puzzle when it comes to building resilient supply chains.
It really is.
It's not just about doing the right thing. It's also about protecting your business from potential legal and reputational damage, but beyond risk mitigation. I'm curious to explore how a focus on resilience can actually create value for businesses.
That's an excellent point. And it's something the research highlights as well. Building a resilient supply chain isn't just about avoiding disruptions. It's about creating a more robust and adaptable system that can actually drive business growth and innovation.
So it's not just about playing defense, it's about using resilience as a springboard for creating a more competitive and agile business.
Exactly. Think about it this way. When your supply chain is resilient, you have a higher degree of certainty and predictability. You know you can rely on your suppliers. You can anticipate potential disruptions, and you have backup plans in place.
Yeah.
This allows you to focus more of your energy and resources on things like innovation, product development, and customer service.
That makes sense. When you're not constantly putting out fires and scrambling to fix problems, you have more bandwidth to think strategically and pursue new opportunities.
Precisely. And this leads to another key benefit of resilience: increased customer satisfaction. When you can consistently deliver on your promises, when your customers know they can rely on you to get them what they need when they need it, that builds trust and loyalty.
And in today's hyper-competitive marketplace, trust and loyalty are invaluable assets. They translate into repeat business, positive word-of-mouth marketing, and ultimately, a stronger bottom line.
Absolutely. And there's another layer to this value creation story that I think is particularly important in today's world. A resilient supply chain is often a more sustainable one.
Okay, so how does resilience tie into sustainability?
Well, for one thing, a resilient supply chain is typically more efficient. You're optimizing your processes, minimizing waste, and reducing unnecessary transportation.
So you're minimizing your environmental footprint simply by making your operations more streamlined and efficient.
Exactly. And as we discussed earlier, sustainable procurement practices play a crucial role in building resilience. By sourcing materials responsibly, you're not only reducing your environmental impact, but you're also mitigating risks associated with resource scarcity and ethical concerns.
It's like a virtuous cycle.
Right.
Resilience and sustainability reinforce each other, creating a more robust, responsible, and ultimately, more valuable business.
Precisely. And I think this is a powerful message for businesses to embrace. Building a resilient supply chain is not just about protecting yourself from risk. It's about creating a more sustainable and equitable future for everyone.
It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected in this global ecosystem, and that building a more resilient and sustainable supply chain is not just good for business, it's good for the planet and for society as a whole.
Well said. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to emphasize that the journey toward building a resilient supply chain is an ongoing one. It requires continuous learning, adaptation, and a willingness to embrace new ideas and technologies.
It's not a destination. It's a process of continuous improvement.
Exactly. And it's a process that requires collaboration. Building a truly resilient supply chain requires strong partnerships with suppliers, customers, and other stakeholders across the entire ecosystem.
So it's not just about what happens within the walls of your own company. It's about working together to create a more robust and adaptable system. That benefits everyone.
Precisely. And that's why I encourage our listeners to stay curious, to keep exploring, and to engage in conversations about supply chain resilience.
Because the more we learn,
Yeah.
the more we share,
Hmm.
and the more we collaborate, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the complexities of the global marketplace and build a more sustainable and prosperous future for all.
Absolutely. And on that note, I want to thank our listeners for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of supply chains. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking.
And if you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to Talking Paper's Faceless podcast so you don't miss our future explorations of cutting-edge research and thought leadership.
We'd also love to hear your thoughts and questions, so feel free to leave us a comment below or connect with us on social media.
Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
And remember, a resilient supply chain is a strong supply chain, and a strong supply chain benefits us all.